Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope that everyone is doing well, had a great summer, and is excited about the new academic and project year. Thank you for making time to attend this afternoon's Technical Assistance webinar on the Uniform Guidance Cost Principles. My name is Margarita L. Melendez Cotay, and I serve as the program lead for the POHA program and EAI programs. I also serve as a program specialist for the HSI STEM and Articulation program and the DHSI program, and as the division liaison for our grantees in Puerto Rico. I would like to recognize my supervisor and the director of the Hispanic Serving Institutions Division, Dr. Stacy Sliepovich, for her wonderful leadership. Thank you also to my just great HSI division colleagues that have joined us today and are monitoring the chat and providing their support. A very huge and affectionate thank you to my dear colleagues, David Downey and Dr. Sandra Toro from the Department's Grants Policy Office, who will be presenting today on the cost principles. Sandy and David are two of our most valued experts here at the department, and I'm sure that most of you are familiar with them already. Finally, and most importantly, thank you to all of you for your tireless devotion to your students and for all that you do every day on behalf of your community, your fellow faculty and staff, and all of your colleagues. A few words before we begin. I have already placed in the chat copies of the PowerPoint presentations and accompanying documents, so you don't need to worry about that or to ask about this. Once again, the PowerPoints, 2 PowerPoints, any document have already been posted to the chat. If you don't see them, just scroll up and you will see those documents. In addition, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube playlist. So if you need to leave early or if you have colleagues that missed the session, not to worry, they can watch the recording later. Speaking of the YouTube playlist, if you have not done so already, please view the video on internal controls that David and Sandy delivered for us a few months ago. Internal controls are the heart of good grants management, and the context of today's presentation, cost principles, goes hand in glove with internal controls. At this time, I would like to emphasize something that I tell my grantees time and again. The documentation and paperwork that we request from you is not simply for our own knowledge as your program specialists. Obviously, we need it to help us help you with technical assistance as well as for monitoring purposes. However, what's most important to keep in mind, and one of the reasons we've done the videos on internal controls and now on the cost principles, is because individuals outside of our division have access to and may review your files, such as auditors. So auditors associated with your IHE single audit, or sometimes your state auditors if you're at a state institution. Also, officials from the department's Office of Inspector General, or at the federal government level, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. Individuals with the Department of Education's Office of Finance and Operations, as well as supervisors and managers at the department. All of these individuals may review your projects, and for that reason, it is very important that everything remain documented, as well as leadership and individuals in your university's budget or grants offices. In addition, before we go on, please keep in mind that this webinar is for grantees of the entire HSI division, which includes all of the HSI grant programs, which are the DHSI, Developing Hispanic Serving Institutions program, the POHA program, which is our post-secondary program, or the STEM program, as well as the FIPSI programs managed by the division, so Open Textbooks, Rural Basic Needs, our earmark grants, as well as the EAI program, which is one of our older emergency assistance programs. So Cost principles applies to all of our ed discretionary grants. However, keep in mind that if you have questions that are specific to your program and your grant, and not to cost principles in general, you will want to follow up with your program specialist. So let me go ahead and just go through this very quick introductory to Sandy. David and Sandy will be our presenters today. They both work in the Grants Management Policy Office, and as I mentioned before, some of our most valued experts here at the department. So thank you ahead of time, David and Sandy, for all the nuggets of information and wisdom that you are going to share with us today. If there is nothing else that you remember from today's webinar, this is what I want everyone to remember. And that's why I've added yet another slide on this, because I know that David and Sandy have slides about this. The three-prong rule for cost principles. When you're looking at a cost, when you're considering a cost, they must meet the three rules of allowable, allocable, and reasonable. And those citations that you see on the slide are hyperlinked to the uniform guidance. The takeaways that we hope you'll get as a result of attending this webinar is, first of all, being reminded of the importance of strong internal controls. As I said earlier, also being mindful of the importance of documentation. I don't think that there's any such thing as over documenting, but certainly under documenting does exist, and that can get you in trouble. Documentation is also important to help you avoid improper payments, because if you're familiar with improper payments, one thing that makes a payment improper is lack of documentation. So even if it follows the regulations, even if it's for the intended purpose, everything, but it's not documented, you could be cited in an audit because lack of documentation can make a payment improper. Communication with your program specialist, that is key. I think that's rather self-evident, but it's good to just remember that, especially for prior approval and budget changes. And I've mentioned already audit. So again, the cost principles should help you with being ready for an audit, as well as for following up on audits that are conducted at your university, whether it be for question costs, for corrective action plans, or for similar issues. Here are some resources that we hope that you can go back and look at after today's webinar. You can read through these yourself. Just two that I want to emphasize. First of all, the very first bullet, attachments and enclosures to your GAN. There are so many questions that we receive on a daily basis about, can we do this? Should we do this? Where can I find it? There is so much information in your GAN. Please make sure that you've reviewed that and then you share it with your budget officer. So this would be GAN action number 1. So when you received your initial award, it had like 70 or 80 pages worth of attachments and enclosures. Please review those. With respect to today's content, especially review enclosure 1, which is key financial management requirements, and attachment 5, which are the FAQs on cash management. And then the other bullet that I was going to mention here that often gets overlooked is our handbook. We developed a handbook for our grantees. We put a lot of affection and time into that, hoping to make your lives easier. Please make sure that you refer to that handbook first when you have questions or you just need general information. And then here is the contact information for everyone in my division, my lovely colleagues. Everyone on this slide manages grants within the HSI division program. So all of us have grants in HSI, STEM, and POHA. And then you can look at each person's name and see which program they oversee for the FIPSI programs or for the earmarks. So again, for those of you who have come on just now, the slides are already in the chat. So if you don't see it, just scroll up and you'll see those slides. Before I turn it over to David and Sandy, please note that if you have questions, you can raise your hand in Teams. Teams keeps track of the order in which people raise their hands. We will take your questions. We'll stop every few slides if that's okay with you guys, David and Sandy. We'll stop every few slides to take questions so that you can just open your mic and ask the questions. And you can also ask questions in the chat. And I will be monitoring the chat as well as my colleagues. So it looks like we have a question. Let me see if I can unmute folks for a moment. Just 1 second. I think everyone is muted because we had a lot of background noise. So let me enable the mics. But I would ask that if you're not asking a question, that you keep your mics muted. We have hundreds of people on. So we would just want to keep the noise level down. So I'm sorry, someone with the last name Andrews has their hand raised.
Yeah, hi Margarita. Thanks for the chance to speak very quickly. It looks
Sure.
like the link that Robin put the link into the chat, so the people who showed up later couldn't see it previously. It's there now, so that was it. Just a question about that.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dabney, for your assistance with that. Do we have one more question before we start? Okay, no, that's this legacy hand. Okay, so I will stop presenting at this point. Hopefully this works. How do I stop presenting?
I think I just start sharing here.
Okay,
Margarita.
Great.
Let me
do
that.
David.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everybody. Great to be with you. Gonna see if we can pop this on the screen. And the PowerPoint is opening up here. As Margarita had mentioned, I'm David Downey. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Sandy Toro. And I think she is, we've got 437 folks here. So I think she is here with us as well. Hopefully she didn't get stuck in the traffic. Hey, all right. Good to hear your voice. We've got nearly 440 people here. So I was hoping that you didn't get stuck in the Beltway traffic. How are you today, Sandy?
I'm good. There is some chatter though that the links are not working. So I'm not sure if Margarita saw that.
We did. So I think we've put things back into the chat box, and I think, folks, we'll make a point. All of you were invited to this program. So if you're not able to access the documents from the chat, I think Margarita and Robin and all of us will work together to make sure that you get copies of her intro piece, her 6 slides, really with those key points on the document links and that allowable, allocable, and reasonable. Boy, that's a great thing right there in a nutshell. So you want to have that. And the larger presentation that Sandy and I are going through, we're going to make sure that you get that as well. But it's our pleasure to talk with you today between now and I think we go till 3:30. We do have one larger activity that we're going to be working on together with you. But we really appreciate you making time to be a part of today's class. During our time together, we're going to talk to you about, certainly the cost principles are a focus here, but we're going to talk about the important relationship, the partnership that we at the Department of Education have with you, our grantees. We're going to identify and navigate key resources, many of those really important ones that are both federal-wide as well as your program-specific issues. Margarita's already kind of touched on, but we'll highlight those again. Now, we had one person, I think it was one of the folks here, Kimberly, had put in the chat that she is a brand new person and looking for all the information. Give us, if you would, just any kind of positive reaction if would you consider yourself new or brand new to administering an ed grant? Let's get some emoji reactions here. All right, I got some applause, some hearts, some thumbs up. a smiley face. Oh, I was looking for that. There's a scared face there as well. Got that? That's cool. All right, excellent. So a lot of you are new to new to administering these grants. And I would say as we're talking here today, and again, our focus is going to be on the cost principles. Um, we're going to be putting you in a position to be identifying resources you can use and important questions that you can ask to better administer your ed grants. We'll be highlighting the key issues concerning the cost principles themselves and taking your questions throughout. Now we do have a hand up, and let's go ahead and take that question. Oh, that's off. Okay, that maybe they were just saying that they were new here. Okay, great. Now we this was a little bit of a addition to the program this morning that we wanted to highlight. We thought this was very important to you, Marguerite, and it really went hand in hand with Margarita's opening slides, where she mentioned the importance of internal control. Sandy and I had a chance to speak with representatives from your grant programs earlier in the year, perhaps some of your colleagues, and we talked about internal controls, the ins and outs of it. So one of those pieces with internal controls, and we've got 449 people here right now. It's possible some of you might not stay till the very end. We know things are busy. We hope you do. But this is why we wanted to put this right up front. One of the key changes to 2 CFR Part 200, the uniform guidance, and if you don't know what that is, you're going to know about it here in a few minutes. But one of the important changes was that internal controls now must include some kind of cybersecurity measures. That has to be taken into consideration. So to safeguard your projects, to safeguard your project's information, the proprietary information, the personal information, and including access to those hard-earned grant dollars, and grant dollars are synonyms for tax dollars. We want to make sure that you are really implementing and following strong internal controls. The Department of Education and most federal agencies, number one risk issue is cybersecurity, maintaining the integrity of our information, that the privacy of the information is maintained, that the dollars are all, everything is safeguarded. So we want to make sure that in our partnership with you, that we're each carrying that load. So I would say to all of you in this role, whether you're a project director, whether you're working in the accounting or business office, maintain those strong internal controls. Make sure that you are not sharing your user IDs or login information to G5 or to any of your internal sites with people that shouldn't have them. You should not have your passwords out available, easy to see in your office. They shouldn't be easy or accessible electronically either. Make sure that you are being mindful of the integrity of your system and everything. We're using social media for so many things. Maintain the proper protocols, multiple passwords, so that you're not sharing, you don't have the same password for everything you go to, but making sure that you're being good stewards of your own systems and following your own internal controls. Make sure as organizations that you are testing, monitoring, refining your internal controls on all aspects, but certainly those cybersecurity protections. That's a really important thing for you to do. And we want you to be full partners with us in keeping the integrity of our data and the integrity of all of our systems secure from bad faith actors, from those who are aiming to misbehave and not carry out the grants and these taxpayer dollars in an appropriate way. So can I get a positive reaction from all of you who are going to commit or recommit to living up to those strong internal controls? All right, even more. Let's get them. I want to see them. Yes. And they're hard. I am an 8-track guy. Sandy and our colleagues here kind of pull me into the 21st century. So I am, I'm one of those people who has seen the importance of this firsthand because I've had to learn. So I applaud you as you're doing this. And I just wanted to make sure that we got that right out of the gate. Know that we're going to maintain good cybersecurity. Don't share your passwords. Keep things under lock and key, virtual and real. All right. Now that we've talked about making sure about the proper access to allowable costs, let's talk about allowable costs. Now, we do have two hands up still. Want to make sure. We've got a person with a number one there, VT or TV. Do you have a question or comment? That might have just been their reaction. Yep, just a legacy hand. Just wanted to make sure. All right. As we get things going here, Sandy, I'm going to turn things over to you, please.
Awesome. So we wanted to start with a little icebreaker, and we have a question for you. And you can probably just let us know in the chat, although raise your hand if you want to unmute yourself. So what is an item you've thought should be allowable but isn't, or that you were told was not allowable but you think it should be? And keep in mind, if you're going to say alcohol, that's our next course, which is Welcome to Federal Prison. No, we're kidding.
Wow.
We're kidding. That's David's joke that I stole. So Brandy says clothing.
Okay.
That's a good one. Food. Oh, food actually is a topic that we're working on some FAQs about. Office equipment for program office, food, furniture, food. Oh, they're coming in fast.
Fast and furious.
Lunch.
We've got a motivated group here, man.
Oh, I saw something about flights, promotional items, transportation, tech, swag, direct payments to students, student prizes. Yep, entertainment for musicians, student stipend. Food is a headache. I absolutely agree. I can't tell you how many pizza parties I had to talk people down from. Food, keynote speaker costs, coffee maker for meetings and conferences, candy, balloons, tablecloths. Yep, all those things. College students love college. Student stipends. Food is only allowed as working lunch. Stress balls. Software maintenance, long term. Slides. Yep. Well, as I mentioned, we are working on some FAQs related to food and conferences. Oh, field trips.
Field trips.
And we will be clarifying for you. I think those FAQs will be available within the next few days, actually. But we'll be clarifying for you the specifics, the ins and outs about food and conferences. And I think you'll be surprised in terms of what is, in fact, allowable, allocable, and reasonable when it comes to food. In many cases, food can be allowable if it is during a working meeting or a working event that is necessary for the work of the project. It can't be something like a pizza party or a networking event, something that's after hours or just for fun, just like swag, something that's extra and, looks nice, or it's, something that you'd like to do, but it isn't necessary. David, would you like to add to that?
Well, I think as we look at this, and we'll talk about those three questions about the allowability, the allocability, and the reasonableness of expenditures. I'm going to use the phrase, the great legal principle that our Office of General Counsel uses so often to clear up any ambiguity, and that answer is it depends. And I say it slightly in jest, but in truth, the context of how these activities, these expenditures are being proposed. And we'll talk about that with the order of precedence with your program statute, the generally acceptable, allowable, unallowable items within the cost principles, and how that kind of connects to the approved scope of the application as we go forward. So there there are some opportunities for certain things to be allowable for one program and that's unallowable for another. It's possible we could have an item that's allowable for one grantee, but the context is a little different. The dollar amount might be a little different. So it might not be allowable for another grantee. And there could be an initial thought, especially if you're hearing things through the grapevine, that this is an expenditure. Oh, well, Sandy said yes and David said no on that. And they both cited the same regulation. So I don't know what to do. We have to look at the context of those things and and the nature of the work, how it was proposed, the intent behind it. So you have to be very careful on that. And as you work with Margarita and the other ed program officers that might be identified in the GAN, they'll work with you to see what is allowable under these particular programs. Now, it looks like we've got a hand up. And before we go too far, we do want to make sure to honor that. So if you would, please, if your hand is up, please feel free to speak up. Okay. That might be a legacy hand. You are muted currently. I think you can unmute yourself if you'd like, or we'll look for your this. Now, one of the resources that Margarita mentioned, and we see here from Lorena, that she'll need to get a copy of the HSI handbook. Now, this was a document put together by the program office. This is the program specific handbook, and they can coordinate and make sure that you would get that. We'll all be working with you, and as Margarita, the wonderful lead who's put this together, make sure that you'll receive a copy of today's program as well. So that gives us a sense of some of the things and the way they answered it, they said some things they've been told are unallowable. Some things that might have been what they wished wasn't unallowable. So we'll have to kind of work through that as we go. So, okay, let's, so from the icebreaker, look here, we talk about forging that successful partnership, and training opportunities such as the ones we have today are exactly about that. We're looking here to work together. We have shared goals, but different roles in this working relationship. And our jobs are really to help you be successful, meeting your goals and objectives, being able to account for all the dollars as you go forward, being in compliance with all the laws, the regulations, and those important award terms and conditions in your grant awards, all the time being proper stewards of these taxpayer funds. One of the things when we think about our work in this partnership is to provide technical assistance. You might even say customer service. And customer service and compliance are two concepts that go hand in hand. Some of the best advice, most important advice that our grantees will receive is the answer of no. No, you can't do this. No, you shouldn't do this. No, this is out of scope. This is unallowable. This is outside. This is not a reasonable expenditure. We don't often like to hear no, but it is an important part of the job. And we will be saying yes some too, but we want to give you a fair and clear understanding of the expectations here. And I'd also want to urge you to keep this in mind, especially with so many newer people here. In our personal lives, and maybe we've even done this professionally, it's better to go ahead and do and then ask for forgiveness later. When we are dealing with federal dollars, with taxpayer dollars, I want to urge you, if there's any question whether or not you should do something, get that answer, yay or nay, and get that answer in writing before you go ahead. That's really important, because it's we're dealing with federal funds, it's a situation of not only would you have to return those funds if you did carry out an activity that's unallowable, but you might have to also provide interest to the Department of Education based on what the issue was and how long the dollars were out. So you want to be careful about that. Keep the lines of communication open and understand your programs as you go forward. Few of the shared responsibilities here that we see. And again, it's a very transparent working relationship. We both the both Margarita and the program staff, as well as you and your colleagues, need to understand the program regulations, know the applications inside and out. As you're carrying out the project, we're monitoring the activities, making sure that you're on track. It's not enough to do the job. You have to document that you've done the job as you go forward. And we're going to be working with you on that. And as you are documenting the job and carrying out the work, you're going to be submitting your records, your reports as required, accurately and on time. So make sure that you're doing that. And of course, we're going to work together to make sure that we're monitoring your success as you go. And at the end of this project period, closing out your awards. Sandy?
Thank you, David. So next we want to share some tools of the trade. And if you're new to grants, new to ed, the first thing you want to start out with is the program statute. And we always go to the program statute. And if you have several awards, it's very important to look at this first because you'll have some variety from one program to the next. Then you have your program regs. And this is specific, again, from one program to the next. Then you go to CFR. So the Code of Federal Regulations will provide guidance, and 34 CFR is EDGAR. So that's the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, and that's specific to the U.S. Department of Education. 2 CFR is for all of the federal agencies, and we know that as the uniform guidance. So that's 2 CFR 200, and that's where you will find the cost principles that we're going to focus on in just a little bit. Next, you have your GAN, or Grant Award Notification, and we're going to go into that in a little bit more depth, but that can be up to 40 pages in and of itself and has multiple attachments on specific topics. And it's a little bit of a burden, but you really need to take a little bit of time when you get your grant award notification and become familiar with those attachments because there's really useful information for you as a grantee. Then you have your approved application. And when I was a program officer, I can't tell you how many times new grantees would tell me, do you have a copy of my application? I can't find it. And it was just really important because sometimes you don't remember what was in your original budget. You need to go back to it. Sometimes you don't remember what was in your original evaluation plan. So always go back to your original application because that's what was approved by the department. That's what the reviewers agreed on as, what the taxpayers were funding. And likewise, that's what's approved in terms of the state plan. Also, what's important is your entities or your organization's written established policy or policies, your organization's procedures, and your internal controls. And we're going to talk a little bit more about internal controls. And Margarita mentioned our recording on internal controls. And later on, we'll mention our computer-based course that's available on internal controls. Next slide. So going back to the GAN is the official document that's signed by what's called an ed license holder. So these are ed department staff, and they are the only people who can sign off on these documents. And the GAN basically has the amount that you've been awarded and the conditions of the award for either a discretionary grant or a cooperative agreement. And the difference there is that a cooperative agreement is when the department has a say in what happens, and a discretionary grant is when you basically come up with a project and we give you the money to do that project. So that the project is what you decide to do. The cooperative agreement is when we work collaboratively with you on something. So you can look to Edgar 75.235 and 76.235 for more information on both of those. And like I mentioned, the GAN can be up to 40 pages with information about the terms and conditions, including attachments and enclosures that include all of your responsibilities as a grantee. You can access your GAN at any time through G5, soon to be G6. We're not sure exactly when that switch will happen. We hope it'll be soon, but it may not be for maybe another year or so. But the GAN is accessible at any time whenever you need it. And if you need help to find it, definitely contact your program officer. But the GANs are issued for both formula and discretionary awards. And there are some differences in terms of the terms and conditions for those types of awards. So again, please review your GAN, take a little bit of time, set aside that time and look through the terms and conditions, because there are requirements based on the type of your award, and you do need to make sure you're aware of what you're supposed to do once you get your award. David?
Thank you. Now, as we've got a sense of, and again, I really challenge all of you to make sure to read over the GAN and the information that Sandy had shared with you. Let's turn our attention now to a little bit more on 2 CFR, Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations. And our focus is going to be on Part 200 of that. But Title II of the CFR is the Federal Financial Assistance. It's broken down into 2 parts. Our Office of Management and Budget, OMB, provides guidance to the federal agencies on government-wide policies and procedures for how we administer the grants, and it includes federal agency regulations. Now, we've mentioned that EDGAR, the Education Department General Administrative Regs, are in 34 CFR. It's all available through the ecfr.gov, the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. The department adopted 2 CFR in this section 3474. So there's some, we want to make sure that you're aware of these citations. Sandy's mentioned this, Margarita mentioned this at the very beginning. You are going to hear us reference particular statutory requirements or particular regulations throughout today's program. And so we want to model that behavior so that, you know, when we're talking about what you can and can't do with a grant, what's allowable, what's unallowable, what's not in scope, why we're asking for this information, why we have the authority to impose a condition, we're always going to be citing those regulations that, you know, kind of the fine print of accepting these federal awards. So we do want to make you aware of this. So 2 CFR, there are several sections within 2 CFR that it's kind of a one-stop shopping, and it's continuing to be more so of that for the grantee community that allows all of the federal agencies to speak in a more consistent, uniform voice when we're dealing with the public. Now, our focus today, we're digging deep within 200 and primarily just focusing on subpart E, the cost principles. But the purpose of 2 CFR Part 200, which we commonly refer to as the uniform guidance, we call it guidance, but it does have the effect of regulations. So it's not a suggestion for us or for you. These are things that we must carry out, that we're required to do. And this, again, allows this body of regulations allows the federal agency and whichever grant-making agency you're working with to speak in a consistent, uniform voice to the grantee community. And the uniform guidance was really, come December, we'll have 10 years of this uniform guidance. So it's our anniversary, and we will be on our 3rd revision to the uniform guidance taking effect here momentarily. But the goal of this, the purpose of 2 CFR Part 200 is in maximizing the value of grant funding. Again, when we say grant funding, what are we saying? Taxpayer dollars, by developing a risk-based, data-driven framework that balances compliance with demonstrating how to meet those needs, those national programs that we're wanting to promote across the federal government and address systemic issues and challenges that are impacting individuals, learners of all ages, in case of the Department of Education, in your communities. We're working together to leverage those dollars as we go. And as I said, we're making some changes here to 2CFR, and I'm going to turn things back over to Sandy to give us a little bit of a timeline overview.
Yep. And the changes have been a little bit of time in the making. So we wanted to give you a sense of just how much time. So it's kind of like the boss of all the federal agencies, gathered together a work group of people from the different agencies to identify which parts of 2 CFR 200 needed to be changed and clarified. So that work group basically fixed up the draft and circulated it to the other agencies in the summer of 2023. And then by the fall, had a final version ready. And that was published in the Federal Register, which, if you're not familiar with the Federal Register, that's basically like the newspaper, which now is online, but in the past it was a printed version. And so it was published in the fall of 2023, and it was published for public comment. So the public had a chance to look at it and give feedback through December 4th of 2023. And then OMB adjudicated the public comments and published a final version in the winter of 2024. And then in the spring, we got the final updates. And now we're in that moment where this is it. We're letting everyone know as of October 1st, those changes are going to go into effect. So the regulations are going to be effective as of October 1st of 2024. So all of these changes have been worked on, they've been shared, they've been updated, and now as of October 1st, they're going to be effective.
Right.
Next slide. Yep. So here you see all Ed Grant Awards with a performance period start date of October 1st, 2024 will have to implement the changes in the uniform guidance, that's 2 CFR 200, effective October 1st of 2024. And there were some grants, in particular formula awards, that had the option of implementing the changes as of July 2024. But all other Ed Grant Awards must implement the changes as of October 1st of 2024. Next slide. So you can look on our webpage for all of the uniform guidance information at www.2.ed.gov to get all of the information that we have available right now. And it includes the most recent set of FAQs that we have. There's also a lovely recorded briefing where you'll see my amazing colleague, David Downey, and myself, where we did a briefing highlighting the key changes to the uniform guidance. We basically walk you through all of the changes to 2 CFR Part 200 so that you can see exactly what was done that's of interest to Ed grantees, so you can be prepared, because we don't want you to be surprised. We want you to know exactly what's coming as of October 1st. It's a high-level overview, but we think that it gives you enough information so that you know what's necessary in terms of your Ed grants.
Right.
And we're adding more information as we get it, and that way you'll know what to do for your Ed grants. So this webpage has everything that you need to know about all the changes to 2 CFR Part 200.
And Sandy, I will say one thing that we will definitely be adding, and I'm going to knock on wood here, at the beginning of October, we're part of a working group with OMB on their own computer-based training that walks you through the entire 2 CFR Part 200 4 sections. I've got a little bit of homework tonight on module 1, just kind of the opening of it. But this training is a great kind of precursor for that very detailed training that's going to be available by OMB that we're going to have links to. So additional resources to help you, keeping in mind, of course, that all of these resources are valuable, but you want to make sure that you take them into the context of your program statutes. Now, as we look here we're going to focus here on part 200. Let's look at the table of contents of it. And again, this is all easily viewed on the ecfr.gov. The changes that you can learn about, they're not going to be live on the ecfr.gov until October 1. So if we went to the uniform guidance today, the thresholds, the dollar amount changes. One of the changes that we'll note here is that equipment has gone from a per unit price of $5,000 to $10,000, meaning that all supplies effective October 1 are going to be, under, that will exceed that $5,000. Now it'll be up to the $10,000 mark. We point that out just to note, if we went to the uniform guidance today, it would still say equipment's a $5,000 threshold, but October 1, that's going to change. The audit requirements, again, today, in the last few years, it's been $750,000, $750,000. Come October 1, the regulations will reflect that it's $1 million. And again, for the big overview on those changes, watch our briefing, as well as review the information in the Federal Register that really you can see the language and how it's spelled out. But the table of contents here, you can see we've got acronyms and definitions, and it's really helpful, I think, to look those over, especially for new people to understand those terms. A couple of things we just say, real quick. I don't want to turn this into an overview of 2 CFR, but a couple of points. You might see a couple of acronyms such as FAIN, the Federal Awardee Identification Number. And we don't use that term very often here at the Department of Ed, but what you have that identifies your particular grant project is a PR award number. So if you see the acronym FAIN as you're going through Subpart A, FAIN and PR award number, they're synonyms. Within the general provisions, there's a few changes that we want to make you aware of, and how the guidance has now been more aligned to specific statutes. The applicability sections here, a few of the big tenets in terms of the overview changes. You're going to see a greater use of plain language. Believe it or not, we're trying to take away some of the governmentese that can be confusing and maybe a little intimidating to folks. We're trying to speak in a clear way and using more plain language. We're looking to reduce burden. We are trying to adjust dollar thresholds to reflect the typical increases in general cost of living. Hence, the equipment and supply definition, that threshold has increased as we go forward. Subpart C are the pre-award requirements that agencies have to carry out before we put the money out on the street and make our decisions. The post-award requirements outline our responsibilities working with you and the grantee community. It also touches on your responsibilities in terms of the deadlines for general reporting submissions and the like. And of course, today's topic, the cost principles themselves. That's why it has a little asterisk by it. That's going to be our focus today. The audit requirements in Subpart F and the appendices that are discussed here, with dealing with indirect costs and the like, but just to make you aware of those. And again, as we look here at Subpart E, in the cost principles themselves, we've provided with you in the slides. We go through each of the proper citations. Now, remember, when we're making our decisions and our communication, if we think that there's a rationale for why we're doing something or basing a decision on why something's allowable or unallowable, we're going to be providing you citations. It could be from the program statute. It could be here from, could be Edgar, or it could be the cost principles themselves. Most likely, when we're talking about allowable and unallowable costs, if we're not referencing the statute, the citations are going to come from this section here in subpart E. And so we just want to highlight those. The 403 through 405, that was the beginning of this presentation with Margarita's slides. We're going to talk to you about the factors of allowability, the reasonableness, the allocability of the costs, and understanding where the needs of the project begins and ends. Look at some of the direct and indirect costs, kind of a little bit of an understanding there. Although, quite frankly, folks, to get into the weeds of indirect costs, that's a separate program, and we've got some additional good, really, really outstanding computer-based trainings on those. And there'll be a recorded training on the changes within 2 CFR that'll be available in late September, early October on the indirect costs. We do have some breakdown on the special considerations for state and local governments, tribal governments, the considerations for IHEs as we go through it. And that's kind of just a 90,000 fly overview of the table of contents of the subpart E. We're going to dive into, between now and the end here, some of the key concepts. Sandy?
Yep. So we wanted to take a little bit of a step back at this point and just talk a little bit about costs in general. So first of all, most of you probably already know this, but just a reminder about the difference between direct costs and indirect costs. So direct costs are those costs that are charged directly to the federal award, and indirect costs are costs that are charged to the federal award based on an established rate or percentage and allow the non-federal award to cover the cost of doing business not readily identifiable to one specific award. For example, utilities. So what does that mean? So direct costs are basically things that have to do with the project. So for example, if you're focusing on a STEM project having to do with math, the indirect costs would be things like the light bill or paying the accountant or, renting a space to hold the math workshops in. So that's the difference. The indirect costs are not necessarily anything having to do with the STEM project itself, but the costs that have to do with, the business of your organization. And sometimes you might have questions about whether or not something is an indirect cost or a direct cost. And if you have questions, you should go to your program officer to get clarity. And there are occasions where your program officer might have questions and might have to go to their program attorney. Things can get a little bit tricky sometimes, and your program attorney is usually the best place or person to go to for those tricky questions. And so we always tell you, the buck stops there. And I see there's a hand raised if you want to mute yourself. That's,
So the question I had was in reference to indirect costs.
Mhm.
Now it's saying that we can do established rate or percentage non-federal award to cover the cost of doing business such as utilities. Now, would that mean that, for instance, we could pay the utility bill with it in full, or does that mean, which I'm thinking, a percentage of that utility that actually covers that particular grant entity?
Like David mentioned earlier, it depends. So I would check in with your program officer, because usually the percentage refers to the percentage that's allowable from, for example, when they mention a percentage, it's what is allowed based on the calculation. So there's it's a little bit complicated to get to right now in the amount of time we have.
So we take 8%
Yes.
of the actual grant,
Mhm.
and typically we only use it to pay salaries, because
Yep.
we were under the impression that we would have to, um, like I said, have a portion of the utility bill, for instance, to pay towards it that had to do with the grant using that percentage of electricity or something like that. Whereas I don't understand why we can't take, when we take the percentage of indirect off costs when we subtract student activities, that we can't use those funds for whatever related to business we want, other than actually having to take a percentage that the actual entity uses to be able to pay on that side.
Right. And well, Ms. Vaughn, let me, and again, I don't want to sidestep anything here. We'll make sure to get to your question in full. Generally speaking, and you've mentioned here with this particular program that there is an 8% cap. So whatever negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that your organization has, and it might be higher than that. Some organizations have higher, some will be lower. It's 8% or the actual, whichever is the lesser. And the what you're able to use those indirect costs for are generally outlined in the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement with your cognizant agency. So how that 8% gets divvied out to support the cost of the project would be listed in that indirect cost rate agreement. And that's going to vary. There would be similarities by the type of entities that are being represented here, but that's going to vary by what was negotiated in the agreement as to how, generally how those costs would be used. Now, organizations could, allot to, if an organization has only one grant, my sense would be that they'd be direct charging everything in that. But when there are multiple awards, there will be typically be the rate, and again, the how those dollars are figured would be part of the agreement. It is possible that an organization may elect to give back that 8% to the grant project itself, but that 8% is negotiated to kind of cover those general costs that negotiated. And depending on the size and the type of organization, those costs are going to vary. It could pay for the accounting or business office cutting the check. It could count for utilities. In some instances, it might also include, thinking about security for the place. So fencing and whatnot could be part of that indirect cost. Again, those are not things that are direct charge allowable, generally speaking, but it could be part of that negotiated rate. I see Margarita's got some points there in the chat, and I don't want to sidestep this or try to, we want to hit every question thoughtfully. Some of their questions might take a little bit more time, and the program officer who knows your project better than us could be better positioned. So not trying to pass the buck, but we do want to make sure that we no one's going to know your program better than you and Margarita and the program folks here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Oh, yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
No, and I'll add that that's a really great question. And I just wanted to add that sometimes there are even restrictions in the indirect cost rate agreements, and the program specialists are well versed in being able to read through the agreements and not just making sure that they check for those restrictions, but also in terms of making sure they check the rates and checking that the rates are applied correctly. So,
Right.
for example, when I was a program officer, I would double check the math to make sure that the grantee used the right rate, because sometimes, for example, if you're at a university, there might be one rate for doing research on campus and another rate for doing research off campus, and sometimes the wrong rate was used. And then it was applied incorrectly. So the program officer, the program specialist always has to double check the math and always check to make sure that the terms within the rate are followed. So it can get very tricky. So thank you for the question, and also thank you, Margarita, for your note in the chat.
Yep.
It's we have a really good computer course on indirect costs, and we have an indirect cost rate division, and they do their own internal training for our staff because it's so complicated. It's a lot of material to cover. But to go back to what Margarita touched on at the very beginning of this session, some key questions in the budget have to do with, are the items themselves allowable, allocable, and reasonable? And just to go back to what those terms mean, allowable means, are the costs supported by proper documentation? Are they consistently treated? Are they reasonable and allocable? Allocable means, are they chargeable to the federal award in accordance with relative benefits that are received? And reasonable costs mean they don't exceed what would be incurred by a prudent person at the time that a decision was made to incur the cost. So basically, when a program officer or a program specialist looks at your budget, they're going to see, are these costs comparable to what other projects have in their budgets? Do they make sense? And when we do training that has to do with budgets, we try to give the program offices different kinds of resources to use when they think about budgets and how to find ways to, look at things like GSA. So GSA, for example, has tools that you can use to get, costs like per diem rates when you go to conferences, so that when grantees propose budget line items for travel, they're not, using hotel rates that are sky high. So that would be reasonable when we're talking reasonable. Next slide.
Right. As we go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. So
right.
I was just gonna keep talking, but you go.
Well, we're going to talk this is the allowability of costs, and we've had this. You could tell we've had this all absolutely figured out when we speak with, but we trip up a little bit here as we're trying to be polite. The allowability of costs, again, cost is allowable when it's necessary and reasonable for the performance of those federal awards, consistent with policies and procedures. See, this really digs into what's in that 200-403. Accorded consistent treatment, either indirect, is it an indirect cost or a direct cost? So think about that. Consistency in this is going to be key, how you're documenting it. And you want to be thinking about where the needs of the project begin and end and the needs of the institution begins and ends. I hope none of you are feeling that pressure to, well, there's this pot of money. Well, it can be used for all of this, right? Well, it's got to stay within the scope of the grant. And again, that's where we go conforming to the limitations or exclusions set forth in the cost principles or the award terms and conditions. That would include the program statute and the approved competitive application that you submitted. All of you, we had 431 now. I think we had a high of 466. All of you have earned a level of success, and were determined to be the most qualified organizations that had the most informative and persuasive plans to use our taxpayer dollars to meet these needs. So have a lot of confidence in your selection in this. But the key is to keep showing and living up to what you said you would do. Make sure that your records, that you're able to maintain things according to those generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. And again, make sure that for any type of cost share match that may be required or might have been included in your applications, that you live up to that, honor that, and treat the cost share dollars the same as you would the federal, and document what you should ask. Some of the key questions to ask here: do these expenditures comply with what's outlined in subpart E, the program laws and those regs? Is it sound business practices supporting these expenditures? Does it make sense? And would you treat it the same if it wasn't federal dollars? That doesn't give you greater flexibility. It gives you the same treatment as all of the dollars that your organization is administering. Make sure that you can document it. If you can't document that the expenditure was allowable, allocable, and reasonable, or that it even was completed, we've got a concern. So good record keeping is critical, and you got to make sure that you're staying within your own organizational policies and practices. Sandy?
Yep. So I mentioned this already, so just a reminder, the cost is allocable if you can assign it or charge it to one or more cost objectives based on a cost benefit or other equitable relationship. So that means it's something within the project that makes sense, right? So there's something in the project that needs this cost, right? It has to be chargeable to an objective or a goal, something that has to happen. And a question that you can ask yourself is, does the portion of the cost to the grant equal the benefit received? So if you can't buy this thing, if you can't purchase this object or pay this cost or hire this person, does the activity, harm you or harm the project in some way? Or, should you reclassify this item as an indirect cost? So these are questions that you should ask yourself. Is this something that really has to happen for the project to be successful? Or is it something that, is really more of an indirect kind of cost?
Right. And the first statement that you made there, Sandy, is so important. This benefit, the cost of the grant, does that equal the benefit received? So, let's think about this for a second, folks. If Sandy and I were leading two different activities within our office, and let's say, hey, why don't we get a guest speaker to come in and talk to the staff? Okay, that's great. Well, if the speaker focuses on human subjects, and that's more of what Sandy might be doing, and maybe three of the people, but let's say the rest of us, we don't deal with, the six more of us, we don't necessarily deal with human subjects. It's good to know, but it doesn't really help and benefit our job. Even though there are two groups that are coming in for this joint activity, it wouldn't make sense for it to be a 50-50 split. If Sandy with a smaller number of people get a greater benefit than the majority of us, it tends to reason that smaller group should be paying more of the funds. So if they're going to get more of a benefit than the other group, then the dollar should reflect that. And again, there's going to have to be documentation, professional judgment, but just because you have two groups doesn't mean it's a 50-50 split. The other one group could be 60-40, 70-30, depending on the benefit received. So be thinking about this thoughtfully. And a quick homework assignment. Let's put it on your hands, show of reactions rather. How many of you know the person in the accounting or business office that draws down your funds? Give me a reaction from folks. All right, we've got few hearts, a lot more thumbs up. Okay, good. A lot of people saying yes. Great. Because if If you don't know who that is, then my recommendation would be tomorrow. It's kind of late the day on the East Coast, but if it's not too late where you are, man, go introduce yourself and make sure that you have a connection with the folks that are drawing down and moving your funds. We're not asking you to be an expert on everything as a project director, but we want you to know who those folks are. And a project director, you should kind of have a sense of how much money has been expended on for your project at any given time. We're not at, we're going to have records that ask for, to account for every penny. Yes, but you should just from a planning and leadership position have a sense of where you are in the drawdowns and the rate of the draws and such. Now let's talk about the concept of reasonableness. You can see here also in 404, it's a cost is reasonable if it's in nature and amount does not exceed that which would be incurred by the prudent person in comparable circumstances. Now that's a very subjective term there, but we have to be thinking about, does it make sense for the project? Can you buy computers with federal funds? Generally speaking, yes, you can. Can you buy computers in year one and year two? Generally speaking, you could, but why do you need to buy more computers in the second year? What's the rationale or the need for that? And if you are buying computers in consecutive years and the cost of the computers in the second year are twice as expensive as the computers from year one, what does that reflect? Why is that from? Was it just a massive increase in inflation that some of us have felt over the past few years with COVID? Was it a higher grade computer? And if so, why did we get it? Is that listed in the application? Again, it needs to be reasonable. There could be legitimate reasons why certain expenditures are laid out, but it needs to thoughtfully conform to the program statute, the cost principles, and the scope of the application that you've put forward and are operating under. Does that make sense? So be thinking about that. And that prudent person standard, and it's very subjective, as I said, all of us get to play that role of being the prudent person as we go forward. Sandy, we've got 15 minutes to go. We had a case study for you, and what we're going to do when we include the information for you as an audience, we've got a little homework you can take or you and your teammates can do. We'll include both the set of questions. There are 20 items that you might try to look up, and we'll give you the answer key as well. Now, I don't think we've doggone it. We just don't have the time to do the case study right now. It would be a boring 15 minutes for those who are watching this recording later as we just sit back. But we'll make sure that you've got that case study and can play along with that game with your colleagues down the road. We want to think, when we think about the allowable costs, and again, we've talked about documentation, make sure that your record of expenditures and activities really serve as a monetary roadmap to let us know where you are at any given time in your project. The roadmap should start on the first day of the first year of the grant, and the finish line of this roadmap getting to our destination is the last day in the last year with all the goals and objectives achieved. In the midst of that, though, you want to make sure that your records are clear, concise, and detailed. They're consistent with institutional policies. They meet the federal requirements. They're aligned with any performance measures that your program might have. Any revisions are within the scope of the grant. And be thinking about this when we look at a roadmap, when we think about our records. Let's imagine if all 400, some of us, would be on, well, we can't do a bus. That's too big. We're going to take a big old boat. We're all going on a boat. And we're going to look at the North Star, and we're going to say we're going to go from the Atlantic coast. We'll leave Baltimore, and we're going to head over to merry old England. Now, here we're going to be using our sextant and using the night stars, and we're going to be measuring that out with the maps that we're using. If our maps stopped midway between the U.S. coast and Britain, how helpful would those maps be? If those maps kind of gave an indication that we were miscellaneous nautical miles away, they wouldn't be helpful. So I say that to say that our record should answer questions and not raise them in the minds of department staff, your auditors, whoever might replace you or your colleagues within your organization. They should answer questions and not raise them in their minds. And the larger the dollar amount associated with an activity, or the more important an activity would be to the project's success, the greater the level of detail you need to have. Sandy?
Yes. So some general concepts for you to take with you when all is said and done is keep in mind it's important to understand the value of a dollar in terms of your overall grant project, and try to be strategic when you consider, building in the rising costs of travel, supplies, and resources. Just like David mentioned, post COVID, we've seen lots of rising costs, especially in terms of construction. That's something I saw when I was in the charter school programs office. So just keep those rising costs in mind. Also, treat matching dollars the same as federal dollars. If you promise cost share or match, those are the same as federal dollars when it comes time to account for them when you close out your grant. And have a plan for every dollar. So when you submit your APR, your annual performance report or your interim report, how have you spent your dollars? How are you going to spend your dollars? What happens when you have carryover? Your dollar should have a corresponding activity. So have a plan for those dollars. And if you don't have a plan for every dollar, then you don't need that dollar. So these are some key concepts to keep in mind. And
Go ahead. Go. No. My apologies. Go ahead, Sandy.
Overlap.
Sorry.
No, you go.
Okay, we're so polite, even though we didn't have all their parts down. Shame on me. Procurement concepts, not in subpart E, but in subpart D, we have the procurement standards, 200, 317 through 327. A couple of key changes. Indian tribes are now to follow their own procurement policies and procedures as states do. So the uniform guidance better reflects the level of autonomy and deference that tribal entities have, the same as we would our state education agencies and our state governments. Geographic preferences have been removed with this, and there has been an additional citation, I think it's in 203.19, that scoring mechanism for rewarding bidders committing to specific numbers of items or units of goods and services purchased, and types of U.S. jobs and certain compensations for supporting U.S. businesses and U.S. Employees has been included as well. And this kind of reflects how the uniform guidance and this grant management regulations support and complement other initiatives going on across the department, whether it's the Build America, Buy America Act, BABA, or the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, both really two very important hallmarks of the Biden administration in supporting American industry and American growth in terms of quality jobs here at home. With procurement concepts, we also want to emphasize to you folks the very important piece of having established written policies and procedures on how you have bid solicitations, follow the requirements here in terms of the dollar level of those, and make sure that as you're following these procurement policies, these written policies, that you avoid any real or perceived conflicts of interest in your bid selections. It's really important when we're dealing with taxpayer dollars, the perception of bias or a conflict of interest, just as it is on our funding decisions or anything that we do is when we're representing the government. It's just as important that you avoid any perceived, let alone real conflicts of interest in how you're making your procurement decisions.
And
Excuse me, David.
yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry. It looks like we have a hand raised. I don't know if it's Legacy, but
Oh,
the
yeah.
first hand raised is Brooke. Not sure if that's a first or a last name.
Brooke Marsh. Brooke, well, sorry for so sorry for ignoring you. Talk to us. You are on mute, so if you can unmute yourself,
Yeah,
or we can.
I didn't mean to if it's raised. It's not showing raised on my side.
Oh, okay. Well, we're glad that you're here. That's okay then.
Thanks, though.
Sure. All right. And then we're hand number two, and it might have just been to say, with responding in one of the issues. We've got a person AA. I don't see a name, just the initials. Do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Sure can. Talk
Okay,
to us.
perfect. Awesome. Thank you. I had a question going back to the previous slide about procurement. If I recall, there were thresholds by which, so for example, if there was going to be a consultant or some type of professional service that was being um, secured, that there was a threshold, or there was, I feel like I recall there being a couple of different thresholds for the procurement process. Is that still the case? So for example, if it's, $1,000 versus five
Yes, you could.
thousand
Yes,
dollars, if
there
you could
are.
elaborate on that, that would be great. And then also, is it advised, regardless of the threshold, to have a what's the word I'm looking for, but to essentially have some type of documentation that supports why that particular service was pursued.
Documentation is key. Let's take the second part first here with that. Every organization have established written policies and procedures that conform to these standards that are outlined in 317 through 327. And depending on the size, the nature of the good or service to be procured, the dollar amount that we're estimating, that will help determine whether or not a sole source bidding would be acceptable, or not. It just depends. Those factors will depend there. States have the option. States can follow their own policies and procedures. Everyone else must follow the uniform guidance. With 7 minutes to go, we want to just kind of make you aware of the procurement standards and a couple of the changes. But we're not in a position to go into more detail on that right now. Forgive me on that. I do see a thumbs up to indicate you understand. But Margarita and the program staff can help you. We also have some additional resources and materials that we'll be kind of pointing you to as well, to kind of help answer those questions. But let's read over 200, 317 through 327, and you can see where the sole sourcing and the simplified acquisition threshold kicks in, when we need to have the competitive bid process, and that as we talk about a little bit more. Okay. And let's see, I see a question in here. Sandy, I'll let you take it from here.
I just wrote back, there was a question about rolling over funds, and I
Yes.
said they should check in with their program specialist in terms of how to proceed regarding program specific policies and procedures. I know different programs like to do things differently in
Right.
terms of carryover funds and what's allowed.
Right. And yeah,
So,
the specific, yeah, that's it.
Margarita, I hope that was a good response.
Let's see, we've
Yes,
got
thank
information
you,
there.
Sandy.
And thank you, Margarita. And I would just say really quick, and Margarita, you correct us if we're wrong, but when there is, and there could be very legitimate reasons why you're carrying over money from one budget period to the next. Sandy comment earlier in the slide, for every dollar, have a plan. So if you can't justify why those funds were carried over, there could be very good reasons why it occurred. And you still need to have a plan as to what you're going to do with them. If you don't have a compelling plan, funds could be reduced. That would be
Yes.
at the discretion of the program office. And I got to tell you, as an agency, we are looking closely to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being maximized. So, if one of you had an extra $1,000 and others needed that extra $1,000, it wouldn't be fair if we just held on to it. We didn't have a plan. So
Yeah.
look to see how you can use those dollars in scope as you go forward.
Yes. So some programs will limit how much you can carry over,
Right.
and or they will reduce your new award money.
Right.
Yeah. And just a note here about internal controls. You do get information from Margarita in your handbook about internal controls, but internal controls in a nutshell has to do with a process that speaks to a reasonable assurance that your organization is able to do what it promises. So it allows for the mitigation of risk, and it has to do with the operations of an organization and the effectiveness and efficiency of those operations. It has to do with reporting and the reliability of reporting, both internally and externally. And it also has to do with compliance with all applicable laws and regulation. So there's something called the GAO Green Book, and your handbook has one illustration from the GAO Green Book, and it references that. And the GAO Green Book was originally created for federal agencies, but we talk about it because we think that it's a really good reference for other agents or other organizations as well. So it's a really good tool to look through and read about how internal controls should really be thought about when it comes to operations, reporting, and compliance.
That's absolutely right. And internal controls should be established, followed, monitored, tested, reevaluated as you go, because risks evolve and change over time. And that takes us here to some of our areas of concern: project goals and performance measures and indicators not met, excessive or infrequent drawdowns. So we do want you to kind of draw down and pay out as you go. Good record keeping and fiscal accountability. We want to see indicators of that as we go. And Sandy, what is the things that we're looking for? What are the positives if I'm on the negative side of things?
Yes, we want to see that you met substantial progress, and how that's defined can look differently depending on your program. It also depends on how you define progress based on your agents, your organization, and also on your project, your goals and objectives for your what you propose in your application. So we're looking at your performance measures. However those are defined. If you have an evaluator, your evaluator is going to look at your goals and objectives. We also look at your record keeping and your fiscal accountability. So if we look at your annual performance report and compare that to the one that was submitted the previous year, and we see that there are discrepancies, we might get in touch with you because we see that there are lapses or missing data. We want to know that you are able to keep control of your records, and we want to know that there's accountability in terms of your financial management. We also want to know that you can submit your reports on time. We want to know that there are no issues with timeliness. So all of these things speak to success.
Absolutely. The biggest thing here, and we've highlighted this, is read the GAN, but more than anything, when in doubt, call your ed program officer with questions. Keep those lines of communication open. I don't think you could do any better than Margarita and the wonderful people here that are working with the Hispanic serving institutions. I think the real strength of our agency, if I can say, after being here for it'll be 30 years here in a heartbeat in a few weeks. It's the quality of the people, and you all are working with some of the finest we have here at the department. So keep the lines of communication open. Don't be afraid if we say no, because that's going to keep you in. If we're telling you no, it's for everybody's own good. we've got some great computer-based trainings here at ed.gov. And if you put your cursor on there, that'll take you there. Whoops. It kind of popped me there real quick. It'll take you to the trainings, but it's available at ed.gov. So if you type in the ed.gov page, grant training, it's going to take you to the page. But we have wonderful trainings. They're 508 compliant, and they are also, I think, if they're not all, they're almost all have been translated into Spanish. We're updating them to reflect the changes in 2 CFR, but we've got a lot of great trainings. So use these as professional development opportunities. They're free of charge. Well, I shouldn't say free. Your tax dollars have already paid for them. So take advantage of these trainings that we're very proud of and that we created to help you better serve your communities. So with that, at 3:32, Margarita, I want to say thank you and turn things back over to you. And thank you all for making time to be with us today. Thank you for all of your help here today, Sandy. It was great to hear your insights.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, David and Sandy, for a beautiful presentation. I think based on the reactions that we've had that our grantees have found it helpful. So just once again, reminding everyone, if you missed it or you want to re-watch it, we recorded it. It will be posted to our YouTube playlist, and we will also be sending out copies of the PowerPoints, the documents, and the division handbook to all of the attendees on today's meeting. So thank you again, and have a wonderful evening, everyone. Goodbye.
So long, everybody.